But now we're recording, which is great. Okay. Now that we've done that. All right, so I'm going to try not to walk in front of the camera too many times, but there may be moments when y'all get a nice image of me that's probably not very flattering. Okay, so welcome to our first CRLA training of the year. I'm excited. I don't know if you guys are, but I like this kind of stuff. So just so you guys know, this is a live microphone. If you're going to respond to questions, please make sure it's loud enough that they can hear you. It's a pretty good microphone for the most part, but I want to make sure that they can hear what you're saying so that you guys can have a live conversation. Okay. Hi, Vipin.
Hi.
All right. So the LEP 4 Cornerstones, Tutors as role models. This counts as the role modeling requirement for CRLA level 1. Apparently somewhere in there we have to decide that we're going to be good role models for our students, which is kind of important if we think about it, right? So what we're going to be talking about today is specifically how we role model good behavior based on the LEP 4 Cornerstones. Is there anyone who's not familiar with the 4 Cornerstones?
Before that, can you tell us what CRLA is?
CRLA?
Yeah, that.
I will in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. 4 Cornerstones. And remember, Zoom people, you are allowed to participate. I encourage it. No? Nobody knows what the 4 Cornerstones are? I read it.
Accountability.
Accountability. Thank you, Sho.
What is self-determination?
Self-determination. Okay, we're going to cover those today. Now, CRLA, just to remind you, it's the College Reading and Learning Association certification. It is a nationally and internationally recognized organization that certifies programs to certified tutors based on training standards. Now, if you've gone through any of the new tutor orientation stuff, this would have been covered in depth, right? As in, like, I took everything from CRLA's page and put it into the training. So that is also available to any tutor who has access to the LEP tutor resource page. If you're curious about CRLA, all of that information is there. Has training requirements, 10 hours, 4 of those hours can be online. 6 of those hours have to be what we call synchronous, which is why we're doing Zoom, and we're doing a live session because they happen live. And they cover certain topics, so tutoring policies and procedures, role modeling like we're doing today, setting boundaries, starting and ending tutoring sessions. It's the base level of how to be a good tutor. And that's level 1 kind of fell by the wayside because there was nobody in my position for a year. And so we're bringing level 1 back with the hope that we can then bump up to levels 2 and 3. By level 3, you get to be what's called a master tutor, a certified master tutor, which is what my certification is. So does that answer your question, Bill? Okay. We're going to talk about the 4 Cornerstones, and I'm going to minimize our Zoom people there. Our 4 Cornerstones are self-awareness, self-advocacy, accountability, and self-determination. And we'll go through these in depth. This is just what we give our students. So when our students show up, they're brand new, they don't know what's going on. We hand them this little piece of paper that has this lovely graphic showing the self-awareness, the self-advocacy, accountability, and self-determination, and all the things we're going to talk about those elements in there. And there's a little circle here called the 4 Cornerstones of LEP student development. And if you think of development as a process, they can be anywhere within this process on a daily basis. And part of our job as counselors, so I do counsel students and we have our counselors, is to work with our students on this. That's not really been done. We're really just now starting to do that a little bit more in terms of when a student sits down in a session with us, really ingraining those ideas into their heads is how self-aware were you when this issue occurred? What things did you do to advocate for yourself? How are you holding yourself accountable, and how do you behave when someone else holds you accountable? And then self-determination. How are you achieving your goals, and what things are you doing to get there? Those are things that we're starting to ask students, but what we found is that the vocabulary doesn't necessarily to match a student's understanding. So if you say self-determination, a student's going to look at you and go, what? What does that mean? So as tutors, we're in a great position to break this down for them. Now, it's not necessarily the primary job focus of a tutor to focus on the 4 cornerstones of LEP student development. But as a tutor, the students see you on a regular basis. They see your behaviors. They see how you interact with others. They see your professionalism. They see how you deal with information. They see whether or not you're punctual, right? So we role model everything to our students on a daily basis just by being present in their lives. And so how are we incorporating these ideas in our tutoring sessions to help our students be a little bit more successful, not just cognitively, so not just in their classes, but non-cognitively, with their communication, with how they interact with other people, with their personal relationships, interpersonal communication, right? How are we encouraging them to develop those skills? And the great thing about it is LEP tutoring is a low-risk environment where students can explore these elements without high risk, right? High risk would be you go into a job interview and you tell the manager, well, I don't really like stupid people. I could see some of our students saying that, right? Like, what do you think one of your weaknesses is? Well, I don't like stupid people. To which your managers are going to go, well, maybe this isn't the job for you. Maybe no job is the job for you, because ultimately who determines what that is. And so in tutoring, when students say that, we say, oh, how can we reframe that idea into something that's a little bit more constructive and teaching them those skills? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So the 4 cornerstones, we start with self-awareness, which is inner knowledge and familiarity with one's character, temperament, strengths and areas of vulnerability, emotions, and ability to discern what values, ethics, and moral reasoning are important. And then we have self-advocacy, which is detect and identify situations and circumstances when a correction or change is required, identify need, identify and locate the resources that can provide what you need, articulate and communicate those needs to appropriate resources, and then proactively pursue and effectively access those resources in order to get needs met and move forwards towards positive outcomes. I didn't write these, by the way. They would be much shorter if I had. And with that self-advocacy component is how do we approach people to advocate in respectful ways, right? Because saying I need something, there's a couple ways you could do that. Some of them are going to get you what you want. Some of them are not. Accountability. Choices and the results and consequences of those choices are the responsibility of the person who makes them. Consequences result from both action and inaction. As the tutoring coordinator, I deal with accountability on a daily basis, not just for students, but for tutors as well, right? There's a lot going on in my job with 60 plus tutors that I supervise where I have to say, hey, I've noticed X. Let's chat about that. Like your pending appointments have been sitting there for the last 2 weeks. Okay, that pending appointment one is what I'm gonna really hit hard this quarter. I think I've kind of made that clear, but we really need to get better about that. So I'm gonna hold us accountable as a program for doing the things we say we're gonna be doing. Self-determination. This is the hardest one for students. This is informing, equipping, and enabling people to identify and move towards meaningful goals and dreams. Motivate and empower them to act as agents of change in their lives, right? And that's the abstract one. That's the one where students have a hard time wrapping their mind around 10 years from now, where do I want to be? And how do I get there? Okay. So we're going to start with self-advocacy. And what's going to happen is I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about it. And then I want ideas from you guys as tutors as to how we interact with students to help develop this and how we as tutors role model this. Okay. So self-advocacy is the action of representing oneself or one's views or interests. And I've gone through the list of those, but we'll just kind of recap. Self-advocacy involves inner knowledge and familiarity with one's ability to detect and identify situations where you might need to change or correct, identify need, figure out who can get you what you need, articulate and communicate those needs to appropriate resources, and then proactively and respectfully pursue access to those resources so that you're getting your needs met, okay? So self-advocacy is a student's ability to do this, not us doing it for them, but them doing it for themselves. Questions we might want to ask students about self-advocacy is, how do I objectively assess my internal and external well-being or lack thereof and respond appropriately? What will I tolerate and stand for within myself and from others? How do I respond to others in ways that are equitable, and I would add respectful? What does it mean for me to view and treat others with dignity and respect? So when you're working with students, those are things to keep in mind. Those are questions that we want students to consider and ask themselves. But as tutors, and this is from my presentation yesterday, so you guys get the benefit of seeing what other people have already come up with, because I'm going to write down what you tell me. Because it means that when I give this presentation again, I already have a pre-made list that we can just add to. So as tutors and people on Zoom, feel free to add into this. Under the self-advocacy component, let's chat a little bit about that. What are things that we can do in our tutoring sessions to encourage students to advocate for themselves? And how do we as tutors role model self-advocacy?
First thing that comes to mind is like if a student is having problems with a faculty member not using something they have, like if they need assignments in a certain way or earlier than others, something like that, making sure that they have confidence in doing it, talk to the faculty themselves about having how to, that they need that, well, they need that movement by that particular faculty member.
Being proactive about communicating with faculty about what they need.
That sounds much better.
Yeah.
Can you repeat what was just stated? I think us Zoom people might not have been able to hear who just shared.
That was Bill, and he essentially advocating for themselves with what needs they have regarding their classes and from faculty members.
Thank you.
That's why I said talk loud. What else?
I think related to that is to advocate for appropriate accommodations through DSP, or even here through LEP to start to understand what they might need from a tutor if you requested.
I think for my students, one thing that I'd like to help them work on is knowing how to articulate what they need when they make appointments and insight.
Right.
Rather than just saying, I need help understanding reading, which is what one of my clients will have it work with before next week. But, you know, and sometimes they put down the class name and stuff, but
yeah,
you kind of go in there blind.
Yeah, and I have, so what Sarah just said is articulate need when you make an appointment and insight. I think a good example is I had a student who got a little bit upset with their tutor. And when I dug into it a little bit more, I was able to kind of figure out what the crux of that problem was the student said, I need help studying. Right, and that's, as a tutor, your job then, and I think what happened was this was a new tutor they were working with, and so new tutors being new tutors are still trying to figure out what questions do I ask when I'm in a tutoring session. What questions work for me, what questions work for the student. And I think that questioning process really flustered the student because they said the tutor just wasn't helpful. They said they can't help me study. But I think what the tutor was trying to get at was, I can't help you study unless you provide me with a little bit more information about what specific things you're wanting to look at. Because if this is a business class and you want me to help you study for the business class, that could mean a lot of things. Right? And so as a tutor, how do we encourage them to add to that? I've put a section in Insight. This is what Kim has done. I have made it mandatory that they write something down, even if it's vague, which wasn't there before. But I can't force the student to be more clear. I can only suggest. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in that student appointment section in Insight, I've said, here's an example of what it looks like to write a clear need. Now, will they do that? Maybe, who knows? So what can we as tutors do in our appointments to make it clear that if you want this session to be better next time, here are the steps we need to take?
I think maybe clear
Talk loud.
It's self-advocacy and self-help. You can't advocate for yourself unless you're aware of yourself.
Right.
So help me study. Well, you have to, in order for the students or for the student to be effective, the student has to know how they study or how they learn well, what kind of tactics and strategies they use to retain information.
Yeah, self-advocacy and self-awareness are connected.
Yeah.
we have to be aware of our need in order to advocate for it. So you're going to see that there's a lot of interconnectivity between these cornerstones as we go. Zoom people, anything to add to this? Ariel, you had one.
Yeah, with especially within a tutoring session, talk them loosely through the thought process you both went through after you've done it, and help them identify specific areas that they're struggling with. So now they can kind of focus their attention, and, you know, the session can become focused on the things they really need. So.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I would also think it would be better if the students attach the material that they need help with on Insight when they're placing the appointment, or so that even though we know the material, we would like to have a revision of it before teaching, so that we can give them a better experience.
Yeah. Now, this actually just came up yesterday. I got into a little bit of a conversation with one of the counselors about a student who said that his tutor didn't know the material. And I know for a fact that the tutor knew the material because the tutor's been tutoring that class, and this is the first time I've had a complaint about that tutor. And so my question then was, well, what things did the student do before the appointment to make sure the tutor had all the information? And the response I got was not what I wanted to hear, which was, well, that's not really what we do, which that is exactly what we do. But as a tutor, how do we encourage students to provide that? Because they may not know to do that.
I usually drop them a mail as soon as I receive an appointment, asking for the material they need help with.
Yep. Yeah, more tutors need to be doing that. I mean, if you're looking at the appointment going, well, I don't know what to do here, can you send the student an email and say, hey, here's what you said, but just to clarify for our session so I know where to focus, can you provide me with specifics? Can you send me the assignment? Can you send me the paper beforehand? Whatever the case may be, I do pay you guys prep time, right? It's very underutilized, by the way. But that's an opportunity of 30 minutes before your session where you can sit down with this material and review. So yeah, I mean, there's a great opportunity there for you to reach out and kind of start that relationship process with the student before you ever see them. Students who do recurring sessions are pretty good at it because we've been working with them, but brand new students, the second that they think that you don't know what you're doing, they're not coming back. And so as tutors, we need to make sure we're as prepared as possible, which means we have to take those extra steps sometimes. Sometimes the students will be proactive. We hope our students are proactive. But remember, some of these guys are 18, 19 years old. And they don't know to do this because nobody's ever asked them to do this before. So we need to do better about encouraging the student to advocate. Tell me what you need. Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next one. Self-awareness, conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. The process can be painful, but it leads to greater self-awareness. That's the example I pulled off the OED. I like the OED being an English major. Self-awareness involves inner knowledge and familiarity with one's character, temperament, strengths and areas of vulnerability, emotions, ability to discern what values, ethics, and moral reasoning are important. When I sit down with a student in a counseling session and I ask them the ever-present question of, what do you plan to do when you graduate? I inevitably get the, oh, response, right? My students who are seniors, not so much. My freshmen and sophomores really don't have a huge idea of what they want to do yet. And even if they think they know what they want to do as a sophomore, the likelihood that that's going to drastically change by the time they graduate it's pretty high, being realistic. What's the number? I think they say students on average change their majors 5 times now.
5?
5.
Wow. I only added 2, never changed it.
All right.
Yeah, I changed mine once. It's a relatively high number. Ariel's looking it up for us.
I just find 5.
Well, what, they say you have 7 careers now, I'm still waiting for that one.
I think I'm on 14.
Yeah.
So when we think about self-awareness, here's some questions to ask. How do I objectively assess my internal and external well-being, or lack thereof, and respond appropriately? What will I tolerate and stand for within myself and from others? How do I respond to others in ways that are equitable? What does it mean to me to view and treat others with dignity and respect?
So question.
Yeah.
So those are points that we ask our students?
Or you can ask yourself.
Well, yeah, okay, because that's,
I mean, if you need to develop your self-awareness, there's the question.
I mean, yeah, I got it. But what I'm saying is just like that could be a lot for the students, like you were saying earlier.
No. Remember, the students don't understand the jargon that we're using. That's part of the problem, right? We're trying to right now help students understand themselves, right? So if you were to ask a student a question about this and say, all right, when you have a bad interaction with someone, how does that make you feel? Students understand that.
Yeah, right.
Right? But these are just example questions to ask. This is not a set. This is not here's how we diagnose self-awareness. I don't even know how, Ariel, did you find the number?
3 is what I found.
3? Okay.
5 might be perfectionist.
Maybe it was 5 at my institution before,
Oh, really?
which is entirely possible.
Math majors are the most likely to change their major.
Yeah.
As it turns out. So maybe-
I'm not surprised by that.
No.
So, all right, so self-awareness. Okay, for self-awareness, as tutors, how do we help students develop their self-awareness, and how do we model self-awareness to our students? That's a hard one.
Well, that list, there's a lot of people who are well into adulthood, who are into middle age, who are not modeling that list of self-awareness.
Those were things we just came up with yesterday, so this is not an exhaustive list of things by any means.
Well, I just mean that there's a lot of immaturity in our
Oh, is there a
culture.
list of them?
Oh, very much so. Ariel.
I asked the question, like, how do we feel about X and Y several times a session? Especially like with material that could be like, how are you feeling about the class? How are you feeling about the test coming out and so forth? There's questions to help encourage them to express that and explore that themselves.
Good. So asking how a student's feeling about the material or the class. Yeah.
Or topic, yeah.
And along those lines, specifically, what are your frustrations?
Yeah.
And what is your reaction to those frustrations?
Yeah.
Do you just get it done?
Yeah, asking where their frustrations are, where their troubles are, trying to get them to evaluate their relationship with the material or a person or a situation and where they fit into that picture.
Just to kind of broaden the first one that's up there from yesterday, I always ask how their day is going or their week is going, just so that I can understand where their mind is at.
Yeah. How are you doing? Giving them that few minutes to tell you about them and not making it so impersonal that it's literally like, let's sit down and do math. Woohoo. Right? As a writing tutor, it's like, let's sit down and talk about your thesis. They don't want to do that. They don't want to start with that.
Going off that point, a lot of times I'll ask a student how their day is, and then they might ask me how my day is going, and I'll be kind of upfront and honest. Maybe I've had a stressful day, and I'll let them know that. And being honest with them sometimes opens them up to being more honest with me. And instead of just giving that generic, I'm okay, or it's okay, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, I think anymore we're kind of, and this is a very British thing. My other half is British, and so when someone asks him how he's doing, he says, fine, and yourself. And that's the only form of that response you're ever going to get from him if he doesn't know you well. Whereas if you ask me, how's your day going? Those of you who know me, I'm like, well, let me tell you about it, because here's what's going on. The bane of my existence is insight. I'm a pretty open book, whereas he is not. And I think that is a benefit in some ways. Sometimes it's not, believe me. Sometimes I'm loading like that at people when they really don't care. It's not beneficial, but there are times, particularly when you're developing a relationship with a student, where you do want to show moments of vulnerability. Does that mean you have a cry session with your student? Not always. Sometimes I've been in those sessions. But it's more showing the student that it's okay to be emotional and to feel what you feel, and that your feelings are validated.
I think that really helps when it's like acknowledging math is hard.
Yes.
Yes, I'm aware that math is hard. And that's why I'm here helping you.
Right.
It's not-
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I don't do math tutoring, but I do get when a student comes in and says, I hate math. I'm like, yes, I used to throw math textbooks at the wall. I'm not even making that up. When I was studying for the GRE, I have severe math anxiety. When I was studying for the GRE and we were going through the math stuff, I got to a point where I just took that GRE book and lugged it across the room. No, it didn't. I was very frustrated, but I totally understand students who have a hard time with math, and particularly when you have that math anxiety, where just looking at numbers makes your heart beat faster. So empathy is a big thing there. I can empathize with students as to why it's hard to write. I can empathize with why math is difficult, but that doesn't change the fact that we have to do things to get you through the class. So that self-awareness is, yes, I recognize your feelings and you are validated in feeling that way, but sometimes we have to feel a certain way and still do the thing we don't want to do. Right? And that develops a different kind of self-awareness that it's almost moving into resiliency, which I wish we had added on here, but it's more with self-determination. Resiliency falls more into self-determination. So we're helping students develop that as we go. Anything else we want to add to this one?
What's already on the list?
You seem a little off today. Is everything okay? Let the student have a vent session. Remind them of the goals of the session. Model self-awareness yourself, which is admitting distress, saying it's okay to take a few minutes to meditate. Explain the effect of the behavior on the tutor or person in a respectful way. So this, that one I want to talk about a little bit. We do sometimes have students who can be very, very disregarding of other people's time and feelings. Time is a big one. I'm sure anybody who's tutored understands that our students don't really think about how the decisions they make in regards to their tutoring sessions can affect that tutor. Right? Like you've planned your whole day around doing your tutoring appointments, and all of a sudden students start canceling right and left, and that messes up the plans that you had for that day, because you could be doing something else at that time. But our students aren't aware of that side of the equation. They're only aware of what they need to do and what they need to get done. And so the last one on this side of the list is acknowledge that that behavior is not acceptable. How do we, and this is going to lead into accountability, but how do we help students develop self-awareness when their behavior is making it hard to do your job?
I've actually had to tell a student, you're making me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Being very direct with it, to shut it down in some sense. The student was high, and so it didn't really help, but that's what I did.
Right, but sometimes, you guys, we work with students who have learning differences where directness is needed. You have to just come out and say exactly what it is. A good example is I had a tutor come in when I was at Wichita State and said, you know, I'm having a hard time with this student. I said, what's going on? They said, well, they go to a gym class before they come to tutoring and they smell awful. Right, the hygiene conversation is going to be the hardest conversation you ever have with a student, if you ever have it. I hope you don't. By the way, it's not a fun conversation because you're embarrassed and the student's embarrassed and the tutor's embarrassed and everybody's just embarrassed because we have to have this conversation. But ultimately what we decided was to push that tutoring session back by half an hour so the student could shower and then get to the tutoring session so that the tutor felt less weirded out by the smell, and then the student wasn't weirded out by the tutor smelling them. Right, I'm trying to turn this into something funny because at the time it was a very not funny thing. But yes, that directness of, hey, you know, the tutor has come in and said there's an issue with hygiene, and do you want to tell me a little bit about that, and let's have a chat about that and figure out what we can do, because I want you guys to have a good relationship. But if you're coming in smelling like a sweat sock, you know, then we gotta maybe get that corrected. But directness is not always what we want to do. Sometimes we have to have long, drawn-out conversations with students before it finally clicks. And we have to do them in respectful ways. Okay, we don't want to put a student off from having a relationship with us, but what we do want to do is make sure that they understand that I am serious. If this behavior continues, I'm not going to want to work with you anymore. Good example, what's our policy regarding students missing appointments and canceling?
After a certain number, don't they get sent to their counselor and talked to about it?
No, I've changed that.
Do they get locked out of the system?
No. I put it in your guys' hands. If you go in and read the policies and procedures manual, I have put this in the tutor's hands. After 3 missed sessions with you, you're not required to work with that student anymore. And I'm not going to make you. And I'm not going to tell the student that I'm going to make you. Because I feel like putting it in your hands, if you want to continue that relationship with the student and they're able to pass the class, that's great. But I just don't have, with 360, nearly 360 students, have the time to chase after every single student who misses 3 appointments. Suzanne may have had that time. I am not finding that I have that. So I've given it up to the tutors now. If they miss 3 sessions with you, you don't have to meet with them. So how do we have that conversation with the student? They've missed 3 sessions, or they've missed 2. Let's say they're on 2. What do you say?
So that includes canceled too?
Canceled or missed.
I need to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I think I would. Oh, sorry.
I guess if you can't talk to them in person, you have to send them an email that's like, hey, we've had this problem and you missed another session, I won't be able to work with you anymore.
Yeah, and I think when we have those conversations, it's important to reframe it in the I versus you language. I've noticed that you've missed a certain number of sessions. The policy is this, and if another session kind of blows by and you're not there, I don't feel like we can continue this relationship.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the one student I've had to do that for so far, I had to do it over email because I couldn't track
Yeah,
it down.
and you can have those conversations over email. Preferably, if you do, either CC their counselor or CC me. Because what we don't want is the student coming in going, my tutor was mean to me over email, and you know, whatever goes on in a student's head, regardless of what was said or what was written, we want that documentation just so we can cover you. Okay, good. Accountability. So we're starting to move into the accountability side of this. The factor condition of being accountable, it's responsibility. Their lack of accountability has corroded public interest. I did not pick that one. That was OED, but it seemed appropriate. Accountability means the following for the LEP. Choices and the results and consequences of those choices are the responsibility of the person who makes them. Consequences result both from action and inaction. And questions we might want to ask students are, what are the pros and cons of your actions and choices? How will your decision impact other people? Will you be at peace with your choice an hour from now, a month from now? When you're held accountable, how do you respond? Are there actions that you know you shouldn't take, or that you know you should take but seem too difficult or uncomfortable? And then, are you willing and or prepared to deal with the consequences, both positive and negative, that result from the choices you make? Okay, now as tutors, you guys know the lingo of talking with these students. You're not going to frame the questions like this. But during your sessions, you can figure out how to say these kinds of things to your students in ways that the student's going to understand. And accountability is a big part of my job, right? So because the students see you guys more often, and I've given you that power to say, I'm not going to work with you anymore. Believe me, guys, they care more about your opinion than they care about mine, because they see you more often than they see me. Coming in and having a conversation with me is scary, and that's all it is. And that's not what I want it to be. But Ariel, if you tell one of your recurring students, hey, you've missed too many sessions and I'm not feeling like this is working, they're going to freak out because they want you to like them. And the likelihood that they correct that behavior because they want you to like them is much higher than, hey, go in and talk to Kim, she's going to yell at you. And I'm not going to yell at them, I'm going to have a conversation with them. But in their mind, that's getting yelled at. Whereas when you guys hold the students accountable, they care a little bit more. They definitely care a little bit more. I have so many relationships between students and tutors. I've seen so many over the years where they're very close relationships. They want you to like them. They want you to want the best for them. And so your opinion means a whole lot. So how do we as tutors hold our students accountable, and how do we model accountability? This was a big list. So I versus you statements, talking about goals. For recurring students, make sure that they are doing what they said they would do. So if you asked them to complete X, Y, and Z before a tutoring session and they didn't, you need to hold them accountable for that. Showing up on time, checking in with students. That was something one of my tutors mentions. They check in with students in the morning just to see if they're coming. Use it as a learning opportunity. Pay attention to what the student is telling you. So don't just go after them, get their story. Keep a schedule and planner. That's a role modeling behavior. Talk to them before absences, communicate with students. Be consistent as a tutor with your meeting space and time. What else can we add to these lists? Ariel, you had your hand up.
Consistent with the student on meeting place.
I'm sorry?
What does that mean to be consistent with the meeting?
So don't change up locations on your student. Don't meet in one location and then change it up for the next session and change it up for the next. That freaks him out.
How do we do that? Because for me, it's whenever I walk in, it's whatever empty room I can find.
Well, that's up here. So if you were meeting in the Anderson Academic Commons, or if you were meeting over in Beans, or if you were, you know, let's say you're in the Commons one night, then you're in the coffee shop the next night, and then you're in the law school the next night, that's going to really put the student off because they're having to go to inconsistent locations.
That's annoying for us to find them.
Yes. Ariel, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just thinking that if we go with a less extreme example, with the students just being able to do, like, bring their notes and everything, that they're going to need for the session. Because this happened recently, and I found that focusing on, okay, this happened, there are going to be consequences, which is now we're going to have to do this in a less convenient way. I'm not accusing you of anything like that, it just is what it is. And so, like, I think the best way to model it to help the student was just to accept the consequences and move on, so they can see, yes, if I do this, the consequences, it's bad for me, and that's the primary thing I need to deal with. So if I want to have an easier time with this, I'm going to just have to avoid this in the future or do this differently in the future. But that way they don't get caught in the quagmire of, oh, how have I failed so horribly? Is there any of those kinds of thoughts that aren't useful? But they're focused on just, okay, I can, if something bad happens, it's not the end of the world, I can move forward, but I can also just modify my behavior and make life easier.
Yeah. That's hard for some students, just FYI, to say, oh, that happened and move on. Because sometimes they get to, oh, that happened and they never move on.
And that's what I mean, as a teacher,
Yeah.
the way we approach it with them from that standpoint, I think helps them make that connection.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the learning opportunity, using this as a learning opportunity. If you don't want to feel like this again, don't do it again. It's like going to the doctor and say, when I do this, it hurts. Right? The doctor's going to go, don't do that. Here's some painkillers. Brendan?
I like to talk to the students about the future and the careers that they might hold in the future, and that being accountable in whatever job position you're working is absolutely essential, and that you can't get away with blaming someone else or not taking action when you need to keep your job. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, my tutors who are not students have a much different world perspective, because you guys have been having careers and you have been doing jobs and you understand what getting fired looks like and getting written up looks like and having those really difficult conversations looks like, you know. But it's a nice perspective to have, because a lot of our students don't get that. My student that I was talking, I'm going to use my student as an example, came in today and he was very stressed out because he has canceled his for the last 3 weeks, he has consistently canceled when he was supposed to work. Now, he's been working on other days, but he's had days each week where he's canceled his schedule at his workplace. And he has to study, and he has to do this, and he has to do that, and I have to go to this mandatory thing for rugby tonight, and I got to work from 5 to 10, but I have 2 meetings in there. And I'm sitting there looking at him, and we've had conversations, by the way. When he started the job, I said, look, taking a job means you have this whole other set of responsibilities you now have to plan your life around. And that includes planning school and planning extracurricular activities. So he's freaking out about it. And I said, is this a good time to revisit that conversation we had last quarter about whether or not getting a job was the best idea? And so we had that conversation, right? But it's hard to hold someone accountable, I think, in a way that is productive. So often in relationships, particularly with our students' parents, right? When the students' parents hold them accountable for things, a lot of time it's a blame game. And what our students learn from that is it's never my fault. It's everybody else's fault, right? It's the school's fault. It's the parent's fault. It's the tutor's fault. It's my counselor's fault. It's the instructor's fault. Anybody heard that one? No. It's the instructor's fault I didn't do well, right? At what point were you making decisions in this process? And what were those decisions? And how did the consequences of those decisions lead you to this point? Now, you don't have to have that in-depth of a conversation with the student. That's for the counselor to have. But in a tutoring session, if they haven't shown up and they're on strike number 2 and strike number 3 is coming up, right? How do we turn that into a learning opportunity?
Well, I think that the incremental goal setting to start with can really circumvent the tendency to blame other people for why they're not hitting those goals. And it's not just goal setting, it's also like checking in consistently on where you're at in meeting those goals. And then you as a tutor positively reinforcing the like acquisition of the goals as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that being said, how do we as tutors hold ourselves accountable?
Something that I have found as really helpful in accountability, and it's like a really small thing to do, is just when you see your students outside of tutoring, talk to them. I've like watched, and not like, oh, what have you been doing and are you up to date on your homework? But to just say hello and like, how's your day going? And like, I hope things are going well. And to think of those things and be a person with people, because I think it shows that you are holding yourself accountable as not just a tutor, but as someone who is thoughtful and someone that these people want to have relationships with.
Excellent. Yes.
I mean, some of the things we expect from the students, showing up on time to our appointments.
The model behaviors you want to see from students.
I think talking for me, when I'm meeting with students, especially if they haven't shared a lot of information about the class or it's the first time that we've met, I talk about how we can work together to be better prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some students that are really well prepared, some students that are atrocious. And I'll be like, oh, I'm working with another student, never say anything about what they look like or their name or anything, and say, this is what that I'm actually learning from as a graduate student that's helping me.
Right.
Have you tried any of these things? Or have that whole conversation.
Yeah.
And be emailing. Like I email every person as soon as they try to make an appointment to go ahead and start that conversation. And if they reply or if they don't reply, I mention it because it shows that it matters.
Yeah. Demonstrate that you care about good communication with them.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I notice with myself of holding myself accountable is like when I say something about my schedule, I have to know that I mean it.
Yeah.
Because so for right now, it's like I'm working on my master's thesis, and so it's like I can allocate time from any point.
Right.
But it has to come down to the fact that it's like, well, I sit down and be doing this. So I also have to respect my own time and be like, okay, well, I can't do that this day because I have to be doing this instead.
Right.
You know. And in the past, I haven't been very good at that. Because I've been like, oh, well, they need help now. Right. You know? So.
Yeah, I think also demonstrating, that there are those moments in time when you have to be accountable to yourself for getting the things that you need to get done. And showing that to students like, no, I've got another commitment at this time. I'm going to make that commitment because I said I would. Right? Is that role modeling a behavior? Absolutely. Good. All right. So for the sake of time, we're going to move on. We can add to that all we want. But self-determination, I put a little quote here from Dr. Seuss. It says, you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. So many of our students' problems, so many of our students' problems or perceived problems come from a perceived lack of control. They don't feel in control of their life. And who does at the age of 18, 19, really? I mean, realistically, they may tell you, oh, I've got it together. They may think that they have it together, but those of us who work with them, we're like, you don't really have it together. Not at all, okay? So self-determination, and I added this specific definition, the process by which a country determines its own statehood and forms its own allegiances and government, because I think that's very appropriate to a person as well, right? Who are your people? Who is your tribe? And how do you determine how you interact with others? to get the things that you need out of life. These are ongoing attitudes and motivations that inform, equip, and enable people to identify and move towards meaningful goals and dreams, motivate and empower them to act as agents of change in their own lives. So that accountability thing, it's not my fault, it's everyone else's fault. This is where self-determination comes in, right? At what point are you in control? Are you steering the wheel? Questions you might want to ask. Do I have the power to take the next step towards my goal? If I don't have that power now, is there a way I can attain the power to take a small step? If I don't have the power, is there a way I can creatively move towards my goal in a different way while still maintaining my integrity? What skills, abilities, or experiences do I need to acquire to make my next move? And then what motivates me internally and externally? How many times do you guys ask the students what their learning motivations are? What motivates you to learn? What interests you? What do you want to get out of this? How often do we ask those questions in a tutoring session? Probably not as often as we should, okay? But they're important questions, and self-determination is kind of the end goal for students. Yeah, go ahead, Chelsea.
The other thing of those questions, especially like what motivates you to learn, sometimes you can kind of sort of get a way in and explain whatever subject it is in the way that they can understand, which is the whole goal of it.
Yeah, yeah. Self-determination, and what we wrote down here was, tell me what you want out of the session, what will help us get you there. Students aren't confident, so you might want to reaffirm that they're doing a good job. How often do we do reaffirmation? Not telling them how awesome they are, but how putting the effort into the learning process benefited them. That's important. That's that growth versus fixed mindset is you may be awesome, and that's great, but I'm really actually proud of how much effort you put into learning this and how far you came from when you started. This is where you were at the beginning. This is where you are now. And I'm proud of that process. And I'm proud that you stuck with it. And I'm proud that you had the resilience to do that. That means far more to a student than you're awesome, which is like, what does that even mean anymore? The word awesome, if something is awesome, it should blow your mind. Literally blow your mind. Like you can't think of anything else because that's all that's in your mind at that moment in time. And we've kind of minimalized that word. You're great, you're smart, good job. These are generic. Give the students something substantive to help with self-determination. What else can we do as a role model? How do we help our students with this?
One of the things that I do is, as much as possible, be aware of their full course load over a quarter, even though I'm only going to be tutoring them in one area. And one of the ways that turned into a really good thing was with a student who came in saying that she hated to write. We were working on the writing sequence, but she really loved food, and she really loved photography, and she really loved to travel. And she is now a food blogger, and was able to talk her teacher into letting her start a food blog about dorm food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she loves her job now. And it's only because I asked her about some of her interests. I didn't know how they were going to fit into a writing sequence.
Yeah.
But it did, and it turned out beautifully. And she just came back from Israel, where she photographed and wrote about food.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Ariel?
There is the other side of it where, like, sometimes student is just taking this class because it's requirements and they are just in it to pass the class.
Yep.
And that's a part of their overall focus is something you have to get past, but they're not, planning to be using any of this in their careers or even necessarily thinking about it again after class is over.
Yeah.
So we have to, respect that decision and still guide them along their goals, even if they're like, even when they're not as eager. We can make them eager.
The student may not love our subject as much as we do.
Yes.
Yes. No, as writing tutors, yeah, they come in like, I hate writing and I never want to see this again. And you're like, yes, but you can do this.
Right.
Woo!
Like the most ammunition for the C class possible.
Yep. Yep. I'm just taking this class because I need the A. Yeah. I mean, what else? As role models, how do we demonstrate self-determination? Not try to get the students to practice it, but how do we show that?
I always just use personal anecdotes, kind of like going off of like what he was saying, where it's like, because like I'm an Italian tutor, and like did I ever think I was going to be an Italian tutor? Absolutely not. Like in my classes, like I felt like I was the one like struggling along, you know, and so it's like I can relate to them, being like, this was hard, but I learned it too. Like it's gonna be okay.
Yes. Brian?
Sometimes I show my students the drafts of papers that I'm working on, especially when you're writing, they assume that everything that they read and printed or published was first try.
Right.
And so I'm like, no, I feel you. Take a look at this horribly written draft
Yes.
I have in front of me that I stared at for an hour last night. So
and did nothing.
And did nothing. And I wrote this, but I want to finish it tonight. I'm determined to do something well.
Yeah.
So just showing them that you're a local tutor and students.
Yeah. Show them nothing is done perfectly the first time. There's a great piece by Stephen King called On Writing.
I love that book.
So sorry to interrupt. I think we were scheduled.
At 6:30.
Okay, just want to make
Yes.
sure we're in the right spot. Thank you.
That was the most interesting entrance ever.
There's a schedule on the door. Anyway, we'll wrap this up, but let me finish this. There's a thing by Stephen King, who I'm a big fan of, called On Writing. And in this little excerpt from his larger piece, he talks about how so many people think he's this powerhouse writer. And he is a powerhouse writer, but there are a lot of people who help him do that, right? He has editors, he has his wife, he has his kids looking through his work all the time. And he may seem like a powerhouse writer, but you got to remember, he's been doing this since the 70s. Some of the stories we're seeing now, he started then. And so a process, the self-determination process, when he goes back and edits his work, he looks at it in terms of, I wrote what I wanted to say the first time, and then I wrote what I needed to say the second time, right? And helping students understand that this is what you want, but this is what you need, and here's how you get there. So achieving goals, you need to achieve your goals. You need to get a job. You need to graduate. You need to do these things. You may want those things, but you have to look at it as a need. It has to be this ever-present thing that you want in order to achieve it. And as tutors, we have to encourage them to want it. They don't have to like the class. You don't have to like writing, but you have to want to do it so that you can pass. Okay? Last
The other
thoughts?
thing, very often, faculty will include extra credit stuff.
Yeah.
And I try to encourage them to do that too, especially if they feel like they're on a borderline situation.
Right.
Some
Yeah.
do, some don't.
Very much so. All right, any final thoughts before we go? Because I think this class is about to bust in on us because they want the room. Zoomies, are you guys good? Did you guys put your names in the chat? I know that there were 6 people and now there's 4. And if you don't put your name down, I don't know that you were here. Yeah? Okay. Vipin's there. Hi, Vipin. Ilana's there. That looks about right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys. If you have any questions, let me know. I will be putting this up on Canvas, so if you want to review it for anything, you sat through it. I don't know why you would want to review it again, but it's there if you want it. Feel free to email me with questions. Our next one is in 3 weeks, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Zoomies, you're good to go. You don't have to stay.
Do we need to submit anything to like the form for this? Sorry.
Please make sure you sign in on the form before you leave.
Oh, that's how we do it.
Yeah.
For the 20th, is it the case that there's like no